Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into something pretty powerful today, approaching God with humility, especially when, the world feels kind of shaky. We're going to be looking at King Solomon. When he dedicated that huge temple in Jerusalem, there's some real wisdom there, even for us today, thousands of years later.
It's interesting you mentioned that shaky feeling because our sources today, they all touch on it. We've got the Book of Kings, the Gospel of Luke, even this modern pastor's reflection on YouTube. Uncertainty is a common thread.
Yeah, for sure. So in 1 Kings 8, we see Solomon, right? Standing there, this amazing temple he built. You'd think maybe a little bragging. But no, he prays, even heaven, the highest heaven can't contain you, much less this house I built.
Wow, that's the heart of it, isn't it? Solomon, at the top of his game, admits God's bigger than anything we humans can make. True humility right there.
And the YouTube guy, he was talking about open hands. Like that's how Solomon's praying. Not like he owns his fancy temple, but open to receive something. What do you think about that image?
I think it's something we all relate to, especially when we're anxious. Like we try to control everything, build our own security, and we forget to just be open
Yeah.
to something bigger.
It's like we're so busy building our own temples,
Yeah.
right? Not just literally.
Yeah.
That we miss the vastness of what God's offering.
Exactly. And that feeling of being overwhelmed by the world, what's going to happen next. That's what the YouTube pastor's talking about, too.
Hmm.
People struggling with feeling powerless, with everything going on.
And that's where Solomon's way of being becomes so important, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's not pretending everything's fine or ignoring the worries. It's seeing them and then putting them next to God, who's bigger than all of it.
So not clench fists, in fear, but open hands like Solomon, coming to God humbly, wanting guidance and strength.
A posture of surrender, but not giving up, more like realizing we're not in total control and being open to something greater coming in.
And then there's this other part of Solomon's prayer, which is fascinating. He's not just praying for himself, his people. He's praying for foreigners, those coming to the temple seeking God.
Yeah, that's right. 1 Kings 8.41-43. He's asking God to hear the prayers of people from other nations, saying, "May all the people of the earth know your name and fear you, as do your own people Israel."
It's so inclusive, especially back then. This grand temple, a symbol of their nation, meant to be a house of prayer for everyone.
And you see that same idea throughout all our sources. The YouTube pastor, he talks about how God's love's for everyone, no matter what they believe, where they come from. And even in Luke's gospel, Jesus, he challenges the idea of the temple being just for some people. It's a house of prayer for all.
It's a powerful message, especially now when everything feels so divided.
It really is. And it makes you think, how are we approaching God? But also each other. Do we, like Solomon, come with open hands, open hearts, ready to welcome everyone, even those different from us?
Wow, that's something to think about, isn't it? And it goes to the heart of what we're talking about, humility, openness,
Yeah.
and how we relate to God and to each other.
And how that very approach can be what brings us strength, comfort, when the world's uncertain.
Exactly. So let's dive a little deeper into this open hands idea. What does it actually look like in our lives, especially with all the uncertainty and anxieties we face today?
I think it really starts with recognizing, we have limits, like Solomon did. Even the most awesome stuff we build, it's small compared to God.
So it's not like going to God with a shopping list or trying to be in charge of how things turn out.
Right. It's letting go of that need to control, to have all the answers, admitting, hey, I don't know everything. And that's okay.
That's hard though, right? Especially when you're anxious. The pastor on YouTube, he talked about how people are just overwhelmed
Yeah.
by what's going on in the world of the future. It's like we grab for control even harder then.
Yeah, it's a natural reaction, but that's where the open hands thing, it becomes so powerful. It's literally showing, letting go, releasing those fears and worries into something much bigger than us.
But how do you do that? I mean, how do you go from clenched fist to open hand
Okay,
when you're freaking out?
honesty. First, you got to admit what you're feeling. Those anxieties, fears, doubts, if you pretend everything's fine, it just gets worse inside, Solomon's prayer, it was strong because it was real, raw. He didn't hide how heavy things felt, the limits of being human.
So we got to be real with God, even when it's messy.
Exactly. Bring the mess to God. Say, hey, I'm scared. I'm lost. I don't know what to do. That's the beginning of opening your hands, that honesty.
And then, what happens after you've admitted how messed up you feel?
Then you got to shift your focus. Stop staring at the problem, the stuff you can't control. Turn to God. Remember those verses in Kings where Solomon's talking about how huge God is? Can't even be contained by heaven itself.
So it's like Even when our world feels tiny and suffocating, God's presence is limitless.
You got it. And in that hugeness, there's room for our worries, our fears. We can let them go. God's big enough to hold them.
It's like dropping a pebble in the ocean. All right. Makes a ripple, but the ocean's still vast.
Perfect analogy. Reminds us no matter how big our problems seem, God's presence is steady. Doesn't change.
So we don't pretend the problems aren't there, but we put them in bigger picture with a God who's bigger than any problem.
Exactly. And that's where we start finding peace, even in the middle of uncertainty.
This makes me think about all the anxiety around the elections coming up. People are stressed, scared about the future. How does Solomon's Prayer speak to that?
It reminds us we're not ultimately in charge. We can vote, speak up for what we believe in, but in the end, we got to surrender the results to something bigger than us.
So it's not being passive, not caring about politics, but realizing our anxiety, our need to control it all, it's pointless.
Yes, we do our part, but we also got to trust God's working, even in all the political craziness.
Man, that's tough, though. The world feels so divided right now.
It is. But remember, Solomon wasn't just praying for his own people. He was praying for foreigners, people who were different, outsiders.
Oh, that's right. And he prayed that they would know God, too. It's like, even when we disagree, even when we're different, there's something that connects us all, our humanity.
Exactly. And that connection comes from our relationship with God. No matter who we are, where we're from, what we believe, we're all invited to come to God with open hands, open hearts.
That's a powerful picture of unity, of being inclusive. And man, we need that so badly today.
Absolutely. We're not alone in our worries, our doubts. We have each other. And we have a God who loves us no matter what we're going through.
So as we finish up this part of our deep dive, let's just take a second. Think about what it means to come to God with open hands.
It means admitting we don't have all the answers, letting go of our need to control, remembering how huge God is. It's bringing our anxieties and fears, honestly, knowing God loves us just as we are.
And realizing that same openness, it can change how we treat each other, creating unity, understanding, even when we disagree.
That's a message of hope, of healing, especially in a world that feels broken and divided so much of the time.
So as you go through your day, folks, remember Solomon in front of that amazing temple, not bragging, but with open hands, admitting his limits and the vastness of God. Let that be an example for how you live your life, how you treat others, how you see the world, with humility, openness, and a willingness to look beyond yourself to the humanity that connects us all. You know, it's funny, we've been talking about Solomon's Prayer, right? But it keeps coming back to me, how this changes not just us and God, but how we are OT in the world, too.
Yeah, that's insightful, open hands. It's not just about getting stuff from God, it's how we go to other people, especially when we disagree or things are tough.
Because think about it, that clenched fist way of being, gotta be right, gotta control everything, that's what starts so many fights and divides us.
Totally. We see it with families, communities, even like national politics, global stuff. Everyone's holding so tight to their own ideas, no room for talking, understanding each other.
But imagine what if, instead of fists, we came to those arguments with that same openness, like Solomon praying.
Man, that'd be amazing. Like, political debates, not about winning or proving a point, but really wanting to get listen with open hearts and minds.
It takes humility, though, right? Admitting maybe you're not totally right, that you could learn something from the other side.
And that humility, being willing to learn, that's totally tied to open hands, like we've been saying. Knowing we don't have all the answers, and that's cool. That's where real growth happens, when you're open to new stuff.
Like inviting God into those hard conversations, ask him for help to see past our own little viewpoint.
Exactly. And that's the real power of how Solomon prayed, I think. It's not just about being holy or feeling good. It's how that humble way with God, it goes outward, changes how we treat the world, build bridges instead of walls.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left thinking, how can I do that? Open hands, not just with God, but with people, especially when I disagree with them.
That's the question, isn't it? Maybe it starts small. Like before you react to something, take a breath. Ask yourself, am I coming at this with a fist or an open hand?
And maybe just that little change can make a huge difference, helping us understand each other, have empathy, remembering we're all human, even when things are crazy.
Because, bottom line, Solomon's prayer shows us we're in this together. We're all standing in front of a God who's bigger than any of us. A God who wants us to come open, ready to receive. Not just love and grace, but also the smarts, the guidance to deal with life, with humility, kindness, and a willingness to connect, even with those who are different.
So, folks,